Hi, everybody. My name is Carl Darden, and I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today here on Navy Sports Central. I'm your host, and this is the official podcast of the Navy Sports Nation, where we take a deeper dive into Navy sports. In this episode, we're going to preview the Navy women's basketball team with a very special guest who will be able to give us her perspective both as a former player and coach, and we'll get into the history of the program as well. You'll get an insider's look into how things were from the very beginning, so stick around. You will not want to miss this. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are so glad to have you here. Whether you are a regular listener or you're hearing us for the first time, thanks for making us part of your day. We're going to get things started right away because I cannot wait to get to our conversation with today's special guest in our deep dive segment. So let's jump right into it with our sports update. Now, one of the winter sports teams that I'll be tracking very closely these next few months is the Navy wrestling team. Coach Kerry Colott delivered some solid results in his first year at the controls, and I think you can expect more of the same for this season. So far, the Mids have competed in 3 invitationals, including their own Navy Classic, which took place the weekend before Thanksgiving. In that one, they took first place in 4 different weight classes. The Mids who grabbed the top spot on the podium were Tyler Hunt at 141 pounds. He is a sophomore from Calhoun, Georgia. And next we had David Key at 184 pounds, another sophomore, and actually another Georgian. He's from Norcross, Georgia. After that, we have Jacob Kozer at 197. He's a junior from Dillsburg, Pennsylvania. And finally, Riley Smith at 285 is a senior from Mason, Michigan. So all those guys grabbed top honors at the Navy Classic, which helped the team to a third-place finish behind Michigan State and Ohio. Now, in the previous 2 invitationals, Navy had a total of 5 champions. The first was Josh Coderhand from Belleville, Illinois. He was a freshman competing at 133 pounds. And then joining him were NCAA qualifiers from last year, Andrew Cerniglia at 157 pounds, and again, Jacob Kozer at 197 pounds. So those were your first place finishers at the Clarion Open, which took place a couple of weekends before the Navy Classic. So that would have put it at November 7th. And then the following week at the Bearcat Open, and that was in Vestal, New York, both Cerniglia at 157 pounds and also Jacob Allen at 125 pounds came away with individual championships. Now, one thing that Coach Colott did comment on after the Clarion meet was that the team needed to work on being a little bit more consistent controlling the pace of each match. So that's one of the things the Mids have been focusing on as they head into their last 2 invitationals before the end of the year. All right, next we're going to go ahead and check in with the men's basketball team, and we'll talk about the women too, but I'm going to save that update for our deep dive segment. So right now, the men have won 5 consecutive games, and they currently are sitting on a 6-2 record. They've been getting it done with defense, and that's led to some really easy points on the offensive end. For example, in their most recent game against William & Mary, the defense forced 18 turnovers and scored 29 points off of them. Greg Summers led the way with 4 of the team's 13 off the offensive glass, and they turned those into 17 points. Overall, John Carter Jr. is leading the Mids right now in scoring. He is averaging about 14.5 points a game, and Greg Summers is behind him with about 9 per contest. Summers is also the team's leading rebounder. In fact, he and Tyler Nelson lead the team. Both are pulling down just over 5 per game. Next up for the Mids will be George Mason, and that will be an away game tomorrow night in Fairfax. All right, I know that update only covered a couple of teams, but like I said, we'll talk about the women's basketball team next in our deep dive segment. And I'll say this right now. If you want to get a firsthand, unvarnished account of this program from someone who lived it, do not go anywhere. We'll be right back. Okay, it's time for our deep dive segment where we'll be focusing on the Navy women's basketball team, and I have a very special guest joining me who will be able to tell us everything there is to know about the program. She is originally from Wallingford, Pennsylvania, which is a small town just outside of Philadelphia, and she played basketball all 4 years at the academy and was the team captain her senior year. She was also a member of the track and field team. After graduation, she later returned to the academy to be an assistant under Coach Dave Smalley. And during her time as a player and a coach, she has mentored dozens of young women who've gone on to lead successful lives both in and out of the military. So I am very happy to have former Navy basketball team captain and my classmate Becky Lewis join me today on Navy Sports Central. All right, Becky, thanks so much for being with us on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, Carl. Thank you for inviting me.
So I guess we can kind of start getting into it and just start at the beginning. One of the things that's really fun for me when it comes to learning about our classmates who played sports at the academy is finding out how they wound up at Annapolis. Okay, so I'm wondering if you could take a couple of minutes to share your story. When did you first hear about the opportunity? What was driving your decision, and that sort of thing?
Sure. So I guess I could say the first heard about it when women were first admitted in 1976. I was in the 8th grade, and I had a science teacher. His name was Harry Feigl, and he came up to me one day after class and said, "Yeah, they just admitted women to the Naval Academy. I think that's where you're going to go." And at the time, I certainly brushed him off, laughed, whatever. I didn't even know about the Naval Academy, whatever it was. But oddly enough, my little known fact, my grandfather, the original Ray Lewis, was class of 1923 from the Naval Academy.
Oh, is that right?
That's right. And it's a little known fact because my family didn't talk about it much. He was my father's father. And my father was from his first marriage, and my grandfather ended up on his 4th marriage. And so we never got to know him very well. And he was, I would say, how do you want to say, old school, chauvinistic, the kind of guy that would send my little brother $25 for Christmas and send my sister and I $20 to split because boys were more important. Well, that's my introduction to some of the stuff that would, later go on in my life. But anyway, that being the case, so my mother started to do the paperwork for the Naval Academy when I was a junior, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. So I wanted to go to Rutgers. I wanted to play for the legendary Teresa Grentz. She was from my area of Pennsylvania. She had me play on her husband's summer league team. She had me come out to their house, go to their country club pool. I thought that's where I was going. And the thing was, I needed a full ride. My parents couldn't afford to send me to college, so I'm looking for the full scholarship. And, women's basketball scholarships were few and far between. They're hard to get, but, I was driven to get that. So while my mom was doing the paperwork from the Naval Academy in the background, I was pursuing Rutgers. Had a few letters from some Ivy League schools like Brown. I remember North Carolina, maybe Penn State. But nobody was offering me a full ride. So I put most of my eggs in the Rutgers basket. And when it became clear in the fall of my senior year that I was not going to be offered a full ride there, I started paying attention to the letters from Coach Smalley from the Naval Academy. And so I responded to a few of them. He sent up one of his assistant coaches, Bill Bircher was his name, I believe, and watched me play. And so everything started angling that way my senior year. Now, I had to still get my congressional nomination. So I was just in time to get in that pool. And the funny story is when I went, and they all have committees, right, that interview you. So I went into the interview, and it was a bunch of little men, little ladies, and all they wanted to talk about was how my grandfather felt about me going to the Naval Academy.
Oh, my goodness.
And my father, unbeknownst to me, had written a letter to my grandfather. And I saw the response years later after both of them had passed away, and I was going through a box of letters where my grandfather said, "Absolutely not. Women should not be at the Naval Academy, and I will not support." Now, if my grandson wants to go, I'm all in favor of that. So,
right.
But I didn't know about that. All I knew was that my father had said, "Yeah, your grandfather's not going to support you. He's not in favor of women at the academy." So I honestly told the committee that, and I think because I was being honest, and they knew how that generation felt, it helped me, and I actually got the nomination from Edgar.
All right, cool. So now you've got the nomination, that all-important ticket to the dance, as I like to call it. What happened next?
Then Coach Smalley shepherded my appointment offer, and the next thing I know, I'm showing up on I-Day, never having visited the Naval Academy.
Oh, is that right?
Never been to Annapolis. It was my backup school, and that's how it turned out. So I had my basketball sneakers, had my gym bag, and I was like, okay, where's the court? It was a bit of a rude awakening, but I survived.
That's pretty good. Now, let me ask you this. the positions you played, what were they? Did you play multiple positions, or did you just focus mainly on the point?
Well, obviously you can't see me in this podcast, but I am just 5'4", and I've always been a point guard. I like being the coach on the floor, if you will, because I was a student of the game. I've always loved the game, and I liked being able to dictate the flow as much as possible, and just generally be the leader out there. So I've always been a point guard. Plus, I'm not that great of a shooter. And I'm sure we'll get into the things that have changed over the years, like the 3-point line, which didn't exist when I played, which probably could have altered my game, because the only place I really shot from was way outside. So that was not in existence. So it didn't matter. It didn't matter how far out you shot. It was still only 2 points. And Coach Smalley definitely did not like me shooting from far out. So,
right.
So I didn't shoot that much. I think I was a senior before I averaged double figures at Navy.
Oh, is that right?
As far as scoring, yeah. But I like being a playmaker. I like the thrill of the assist. That's always been my forte. So, always been a point guard.
So along those lines, when we're talking about the style that you like to play, being that pass first type of point guard, what can you tell me about the transition from high school to college basketball that you experienced? Did you notice any major differences, any major adjustments you had to make?
Well, I guess the biggest adjustment was to the coach I played for. So I think if I had played at a different college, it might have been a different adjustment. Certainly the girls were taller, right? Overall, the girls were definitely taller and bigger in college. But Coach Smalley ran a slow it down, as you can imagine. I mean, he coached the men for I don't know how many years before he coached the women, and he'd been around for a while. And it was a very patient offense. We rarely would press. And I came from high school where we pressed all the time. We had multiple presses we employed. We were, as you can see today, more of a 4-guard offense in high school back in the 70s. And we had a coach that just took advantage of that. And we got, quarterfinals of the states or something, and our tallest player was like 5'8". So for me, that was a huge change. It really stifled my creativity. It really stifled. And at the time I was, I would try to push. And oftentimes I would get benched for pushing too hard and not slowing the ball down. And so I had to learn. I had to learn to be patient, to run the offense, and trust that the coach knew what he was talking about, and which of course he did. But it was a big learning experience for me.
Right. Understand. So we talked a little bit about that style of offense being slow and patient. Was there a particular scheme that you ran in terms of, how you set up initially and, worked the cuts and everything? Or was it, because I don't know that they ran a bunch of motion offenses back then. What's your take on that?
No. Our offense, I don't know that it changed in the 4 years I played, but it was a setup as the point at the top. You had 2 wings and 2 posts down low. And always there is an entry pass to either wing. And then I would make a cut down the lane, cut off one of the posts, and come out on the other wing, and the other wing would replace me. And the goal was to feed the ball into the post, and then one of the low posts would cut high, so you'd have a high low. And because there was no 3-point line, I mean, you want to take a shot as close to the basket as you can. Right. So that's what we did. Although we had a guard there, class 82, her name was Colleen Cassidy, who could just score. She was only 5'4" herself. She could score from anywhere on the floor at will. She was the most amazing player I ever played with. But yeah, it was a very patient, same setup every time.
Now, how about on defense? You said that you didn't press much. Did you just zone it up most of the time, or did you go man to man? Or
Coach Smalley was big on man to man fundamentals. I learned a lot about man to man defense from him, much more than I ever learned in high school or in AAU or anything like that. So I would say he made me a much better fundamentally man-to-man, getting over picks, preventing being responsible for your man, but also the help defense, keeping an eye on where everybody else was. And it definitely made us unique, because a lot of women's teams did play zone back in those days. And we did play zone on occasion, depending. But we were small, and it didn't benefit us to play much zone. 2-3, our 2 forwards. Oftentimes, because we played a majority Division I schedule, even though they considered us Division II, because of the number of women we had at the academy. It was just like 300.
Right.
But we played UVA and Georgetown and George Mason and Yale. And, we played all those big schools, and oftentimes they came with big players. And I think our biggest player went 6'2". We just had one of those though, so we weren't generally that big.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah. And I asked that question because I know, over the last 10 or 12 years or so, I've coached a lot of youth basketball everywhere from, 7 or 8 years old all the way up to high school level. And I always preferred the man-to-man defense, teach them all that first, because that teaches them the footwork that they need. And, it shows them, like you were saying, how to play your man, but also kind of keep your head on a swivel and be ready for help defense. But one thing I've found, and I haven't seen it lately because I haven't coached in a couple of years, but I find a lot of the coaches at the younger levels, maybe it's because they don't take the time to learn or whatever, but they just immediately, throw in a zone defense. And as those kids stay with that and don't get introduced to man, all of a sudden when they get to the high school level and have to play that, then, their footwork is lousy and all that kind of stuff. So it really did kind of set them back.
Carl, I couldn't agree more. Having coached years of youth basketball to my two daughters, the youth coaches do their kids a huge disservice by trying to win games by playing a packet-in zone. They're not teaching their kids anything. And I would take a loss any day if I taught my kids nothing but man-to-man defense growing up, because they learned everything you need to learn, and then you could play zone if you needed to.
Sure.
But if you didn't learn the fundamentals of man-to-man defense, you weren't going to be a good player at the next level.
Right. Exactly. All right. Good stuff. So what I want to do now is kind of talk a little bit about some of the key players that kind of watch for on Navy's team this year. As you know, this is Coach Tim Taylor's second full year as he's getting into the schedule. And he came to the academy from, I believe it was the University of North Carolina as an assistant after spending a fair amount of time at University of Virginia.
Yes.
Let's just start by, I'm just going to ask you what you know about him right now.
So I don't know him personally. However, one of my best friends, who I was an assistant with at Navy, her name is Chrissy Reese Kasuda. She married a grad, but she was a parade All-American in high school out of Washington, D.C., and played 4 years at UVA and was a standout forward. And she goes about 6 foot or 6'1". And so she had connections at UVA and would go back and be involved in the program. And so she got to know Tim Taylor. And so when he was announced as the coach, the next coach, she was thrilled. And she's not often thrilled by things. So the fact that she endorsed him strongly, said what a great guy he was, and great addition he was going to be to the community here at Navy and for the women's basketball program, which quite frankly has had a lot of ups and downs since Coach Smalley that I'm very familiar with. But I am as an alumnus of the program, I am very happy to see Tim Taylor as the coach and look forward to the direction he's going to take the team.
Right. Yeah, same here. I mean, when I read his background, I said, okay, this sounds like the kind of guy who can really be a really nice fit, not just from basketball perspective, but you learn a little bit more about him as a person. He seems like he's going to be a pretty good fit for, the athletes themselves, in terms of just helping them mature as they progress through the academy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As people. And he did something no one's ever, he's connected with the alumni, which is long overdue. Had Zoom calls with us, was very open to any suggestions, really was genuine in getting to know us. And I really appreciated his embracing us and all the things he said about his players, like more than just as players. What kind of people are they going to be? And, the Naval Academy produces leaders anyway, but contributing to their character and all the good things that he's done throughout the years. I was very impressed.
Right. Okay, so as far as some of these key players, I'm going to go ahead and start with the Navy backcourt, and we're going to be talking about Jennifer Coleman and Colby Green. They're both seniors, which I'm a big believer in senior experience in the backcourt at the college basketball level. That seems to make all the difference in the world. So both of them were the top scorers for the team last year. Coleman averaged just over 17. I think Green was about 13 and a half. And from what I've seen them, over the last year and a half or so, Jennifer Coleman is very consistent. I mean, she'll pull down, double digits in points and rebounds just about every time. You can practically pencil her in for those. And then, and the ball does, it's in her hands a fair amount of time. I was trying to figure out which one of them actually, ran the point more, but I don't really think it matters. I mean, either one. But she's good at getting to the rim if she's one-on-one with a defender. And if she does get to the line after being fouled, at least this year, she's hitting about 80% of her shots. Last year, I think it was about mid-60s range. So she's definitely bumped that up a little bit. One thing I like about Green is her dribble penetration game. I think she's really, really crafty at, trying to get to the rim. And if it's blocked, she has a way of finding that open player and getting the pass to him, or maybe even pulling up for a short jumper, somewhere in the key. So I'm going to ask you this question based on your experience as a coach. When you were looking to develop and build a solid backcourt, first of all, what is it about this tandem that you like? What do you feel that they do to complement each other? And what were some of the things you looked for in a backcourt pairing to that would bring out the best in both of them?
Well, I'll have to say, Carl, that I have not had the privilege of watching them play yet. But based on what I've read and what you're telling me, sound like a very complimentary pair in the backcourt. It's always nice when both of the guards can dribble penetrate, because you don't have to put the burden on one to be able, and the other one just stand out there and shoot, which often happens, right? You have a shooting guard and a point guard. But if both of them are able to dribble penetrate, that takes the pressure off the other. And it creates more opportunities. It allows the other girls more scoring opportunities, because they're going to get dishes, right, when they draw players to them. And then if they're able to also shoot well from the outside, to me, that's a great combination. For sure.
Okay, good. Yeah. And the other thing about these two is they are very, very good defenders. Very, very active hands, active feet. I wish there was a stat for pass deflections because the two of them came up with a lot of those last year, and they did, in fact, lead the team in steals, by the way. So when you were a player, what were some of the things that you worked on to kind of keep your defensive skills sharp? What is it that stood out about good defenders that you played with?
Well, first of all, you're not going to be a good defensive player if you don't have the desire, right? If it doesn't burn in you to play defense, if all you want is the glory from scoring, you're just not going to be a good defensive player, no matter how athletic you are. But you also have to have a high basketball IQ. And, you can relate to other sports too, but if you recognize things coming down the floor at you and you can anticipate, to me, you see a lot of people with good steal stats or deflections, if you will. It's because they have a good inkling of where that ball is going, right? They recognize what's coming. They've seen it before. They've played enough basketball where they recognize that, hey, this screen's coming to me. I better get close to my man so I can slide over the top, or I'm going to slide through, and I'm watching their eyes, where are they going to throw the ball? To me, that makes a really good defensive player.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. So this team is, like I said, we got a senior backcourt. And then one of the players that they had to replace from last year was actually the outgoing captain, Sofia Gatsunis. And she was a very productive player. She averaged about the same amount of points as Colby Green at about 13 and a half. And she was also the second leading rebounder behind Jennifer Coleman. So they've got to replace her. And I think, as the coaches typically do in their first couple of games, is start, kind of playing around with lineups and tweaking rotations and so forth. One athlete that got my attention was Sydney Watts. I saw her in the Women Mary game, and she's a guard. She's a 6-foot guard. And last year she averaged, I think, like 5-6 points a game as a freshman. And this game against William and Mary, the thing I noted that was a real asset was her mid-range game. She was hitting shots from, anywhere from 10 to 18 feet, contested shots. And she zipped out there and took a 3-pointer and made it as well. So a little bit of versatility to her shooting game, and it looks like she's starting to play with a lot of confidence. So my question, and it kind of goes back to something you alluded to earlier in terms of how the game has changed. Certainly within the last, call it 7 or 8 years, the 3-point line or the 3-point shot has really changed the game. Obviously, the line has been there since, 87, I guess, on the college level. But, and in fact, I guess in the women's game, they just recently moved it back to about 22 feet, 1 1/4. And that's just to match the international game, I guess. So they moved it back a couple inches. I don't really know how much difference that makes. But anyway, the mid-range shot is something that a lot of people are kind of saying that it's kind of going by the wayside, because it seems like the shots that you get are the ones that are either, close in lands or dunks or 3-point shots. And, that's about it. So I wanted to ask you, based on what you've been seeing and even going back to when you were coaching, the level of, I should say this, I don't want to say competence. That's not the right word I want to use, but just the skill level, that ability to hit that mid-range shot consistently compared to maybe 7 years ago. Have you noticed any changes to it because of the emphasis on the 3-point game or not?
Well, I mean, just like you said, Carl, there's not as many people shoot that shot. It'll, in my mind, it kind of shows you who the good shooters are, right? If you have grown up and worked on your shot, and you're going to take shots from all the ranges. You're not just going to shoot 3-pointers and layups. So if you are a good shooter and you can square your shoulders, you have a nice follow through, and all that, the mechanics are great. Then you should be able to score at the 10-foot range, at the 12-foot range, and it kind of catches your attention when somebody does that. Like it caught your attention because that means she's a good shooter. Right? She's practiced a lot, and she can hit those shots, especially under pressure. So, I mean, that was the bread and butter of Colleen Cassidy, who played at Navy and scored, she's still the second leading scorer at Navy. That was her bread and butter. 8 to 12 foot jump shots. Boom. Nobody could stop it. I mean, to me, I love to see that, but you just don't see that much anymore.
Yeah, you're right. And the point I always try to make, and I remember, I listen to some of these sports talk show hosts and so forth. They talk about, well, why did it take so long for people to realize that the 3-point shot is more efficient than the 2-point shot? But I said, okay, yeah, that's true if they make it, but
live
you're
by
only
the 3,
as good
die
as
by the 3, right?
Exactly. I mean, you're one cold shooting night away from getting bounced from a tournament or something like that. So that was pretty cool to see Sydney hitting those shots from different places on the court, like she did against William and Mary.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, so the next person we'll talk about is Imani Edmonds, and she's a junior from Hopewell, Virginia, 5'8", also a guard. Last year, unfortunately, she was not on the floor because of injuries, and that was kind of tough because she's got a lot of really good ability. Now, this year, she's gotten off to a pretty good start. She had 8 points against Georgetown to start the year, had another 8 points yesterday against Vermont, and pulled down 5 rebounds in the William and Mary game, and I think tacked on a steal, I think. So she's definitely got the skills for sure. And if she can just stay healthy, that'll be awesome. Now, this is something that I'm learning a little bit more about in the women's game, and in terms of just the offensive sets that they run. And I mentioned it earlier before we jumped on together. Coach Taylor, I'm starting to see him use a lot of, 4 and sometimes even 5 guards out there on the floor. So I was wondering, again, based on your experience as a coach, for teams that can do this, for teams that have the personnel to do this, what kind of advantages does that give you on both sides of the ball when you run that type of system?
Well, again, he's probably playing to his strengths, right? He probably has his talent lies in his guards, and you want to be able to take advantage of that, and to be able, in my mind, basketball should be a running game. It should be a fast-paced game. I'm not a fan of the old North Carolina four-corner stall.
Oh, God, yeah.
To me, the best basketball game is when you're flying down the court and, you may pull up or a fast break layup or whatever it is, and then turn around and be able to play defense, pick them up at least half court, if not 3/4 court. And to be able to do that, you have to have endurance, and you have to, say what you will, but guards generally do more running. than the taller people do, and they don't mind doing as much running as taller people do. So you can do that. You can be all over the court more. You can pressure the other team more. You can cause turnovers. You can, get some more easy buckets, if you will, by having a smaller lineup and a faster lineup and a more aggressive lineup. Smaller people can still, the other end, you can still box out a taller person, if your technique is correct. And so,
right.
If his strengths are with the guards and on his roster currently, and it sounds like it is, then absolutely, I'm all in favor of that. And I think he's playing to his strengths.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. Let's see. We have one more player to talk about, and she actually was listed as a starter at the beginning of the season. She's the team captain, by the way. Her name is Sierra Herda-Lindy, and she was actually selected as the most improved player at the end of last season. And this year, she is, like I said, started the first game, I believe, but now because Coach Taylor's kind of working more with this 4 and 5 guard set, she's coming off the bench a little bit more. But I still want to talk about her because I'm wondering if in your experience as a coach, have you had a player such as her? And let me just give you an example of one awesome play that I saw her execute against William and Mary. And this is right in the middle of their comeback. In that particular game, William and Mary was up by, I believe, 12 at halftime. And Navy came back and defensively just really, really put the clamps on them in the third, and in the fourth quarter, and then they just worked their way back into the game. But on one particular play, I wish I could have taped it, but it was Navy was bringing the ball down, and Jennifer Coleman passed the ball to Colby Green, and she was on the right wing, and Sierra Herda-Lindy came over to that right high post and set a pick for her. And it looked like, Colby Green was going to take it, but she bounced back out to the top. And then Herda-Lindy reset and what turned out to be a back pick for the defender. And the defender never saw it. And Green just peeled right off of that pick, and Herda-Lindy just erased that defender. All of a sudden you saw like she was there, and next you saw Colby Green just wide open, laying it up and into the basket. And I was like, oh man, that was pretty awesome. That's something that'll never show up on a stat sheet. Okay. And I just wanted to see, when you were coaching, did you have players like that? If they were a captain, great. If not, fine too. But I want you to kind of speak to what makes some of those players so indispensable, even though those statistics never show up.
Yeah, gosh, as when you get on the other side of the ball and you're the coach now instead of a player, you see so much more, and you have to make decisions. About who you're going to play and in what situation and what are their strengths and how they're going to help the team. And there are those kids that are will do anything to help the team, and who cares about their stats? And for sure, I can remember 2 kids from the class of 94, Jen Ogilvie and Tara Caroselli, who were clearly role players, never started, were tremendous heart, played their guts out, and they would do the things you're talking about doing. Set a pick, be the scrappy defender that, shut somebody down. Like, we need to shut this person down. You may not touch the ball on offense, but if you can shut her down, yeah, those kind of kids, I love them. And I got to be a real big fan of them. And when Jerry Hutchinson, who I was his assistant for his 2 years there, he went out for 8 games. His family was in a car accident in Arkansas, and he left us for 8 games. And that was back in the days of, no cell phones, no internet. So, when he was gone, he was gone. So Deb Schlegel and I ran the team. And I took advantage of that time to play those kids more. Like, I put them in all kinds of situations. And you know what? Those kids respond to that. They want to play. Right. They want to put their hearts out there. And they don't, they may not be the best shooters on the team or whatever. But, man, and do you know, we went 8-0 when he was gone.
Is that right? And that's awesome.
It was unbelievable. It was part of one of the longest winning streaks Navy women's basketball's ever had in 91. It was an 11-game streak by the time it was all said and done. But, yeah, and I just think if those kids given an opportunity, like Herda-Lindy maybe is given the opportunity, she's going to do whatever she can to make her teammates successful and to win basketball games. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of those kind of kids.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, I heard Lindy's an excellent shot blocker. She did lead the team in blocks last year. So
Even better.
yeah, that's definitely one of her big contributions. Yeah. So anyway, that's actually going to do it for the first half of this segment. So Becky, thanks again for your insight on the team. This is actually a good spot to take a break. So when we return, I'd like to get your perspective as a former player who came back to not only coach, but also served as a member of the faculty. You've had the Naval Academy experience from both sides, mid/athlete versus teacher/coach. So I'm really curious to get your thoughts on that. Stick around, everybody. All right, welcome back to Navy Sports Central, everyone. Carl Darden here with you, and joining me is Becky Lewis, my classmate from the class of '84, 11th company, 4-year member of the Navy basketball team, and help me out here, Becky, 3-year starter, but led it all 4 years, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay,
right.
Cool. So one of the things that I learned when we were kind of getting this all set up is that you actually came back to the academy to coach. So I'm really interested in finding out your perspective, once you got there as a coach, knowing the experiences you went through as a player, how do you think they helped you as you were getting your feet wet as an assistant with Coach Smalley?
Well, Carl, it was, first of all, it was a blessing, right? Mm-hmm. Something I never expected when I was a player. To be offered the opportunity when Coach reached out and asked me if I'd come back to be his assistant. You're already in the Navy, and coming back to the phys ed department at the Naval Academy is considered career ending. So you're
I didn't know that.
Absolutely. I would say a very large percentage of lieutenants who were in the phys ed department got out of the Navy at that point. And certainly it was a consideration for me whether I was going to stay in college coaching because I love basketball so much, or whether I was going to stay in the Navy. So we'd had our first child at the end of our 3-year tour there, and we were both going to get out. And I was considering, a career in college basketball coaching. And it occurred to me after we sat down and went over the pros and cons that life in the Navy, I spent less time away from my family than I did as a college basketball coach. I was away from my family more time as a college basketball coach than when I was in the Navy. So needless to say, I stayed in the Navy and did not become a college basketball coach, but ended up coaching rec, coached high school, ran the gamut as the kids grew up. But so coming back, it was a totally different side of the Naval Academy that you don't often get to see, right? So you don't get to see what happens behind the curtain, so to speak. And there were a lot of things to me that were disappointing. There were a lot of things that were amazing. My first job was first lieutenant of Halsey Fieldhouse. So I got to know the field house way more than I did as a player, all the nooks and crannies and how the lights didn't work when it rained and, all kinds of stuff. I also became the admin officer in Lejeune my second year, and my office was next to Ed Peary and Heinz Lenz. And then my last year was my worst year because they made me the marking officer in McDonough Hall. And then that made me have to deal every day with all the mids who failed PE, had excuses why they didn't take their PE test. And I was like, really? This is, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm done with this. So it was fun. I also taught swimming, had a blast doing that, especially working with the Rock Squad, which was new to me. Right. So it was a really interesting time. And certainly some things were more explained to me. Like when I was a player, I was like, Coach, why are we playing a varsity game against Yale in the rinky-dink multi-purpose gym? Because the men want to practice in the main arena. Like to me, that didn't jive.
Right.
But you get to the other side and you learn like, well, look, women are only like 6% of the brigade. I mean, now they're like over 25%, but back then it was only 6%, like 6% of the brigade. And we essentially were second-class citizens. So you think it's an injustice and it's not fair. And everybody complained to Coach Smalley all the time. And I'm like, you're assistant athletic director. Can't you do something about this? And then you get on the other side, you understand. You're like, well, we're not the revenue producing sport. I mean, there's some things you're just going to have to suck up and be thankful for what you have. And
Right,
so
right.
over the years, I became grateful for all the experiences that I had,
Hmm.
and all the bad, crappy stuff. It's not worth holding on to. So,
Right, right,
but certainly being on the other side, you saw the whole bigger picture of things for
right,
sure.
right. Very cool. So when you talk about, that experience with Coach Smalley, one of the things that I've always been interested in, I hadn't really had a chance to ask um, any any of the coaches like, that handle football or basketball about this. And it has to do with like the recruiting process, right? I mean, I know that in a lot of cases you are assigned a particular geography or something like that. And then you go ahead and do what you do. But when it came to recruiting athletes, I was wondering if you can kind of share what some of that experience was like. Some of the kids that you talked to, that sort of thing. And what was it that you looked to identify in terms of just deciding for yourself, okay, there's no doubt that this person's probably got the skills to play, but can they make it in the hall?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I will tell you this: my initial exposure to recruiting was a surprise because I
Hmm.
didn't realize how much more work I had to do to recruit the parents.
Oh, right.
So it
Okay.
wasn't necessarily the kid because we're talking about girls now, and
Hmm.
and I think it's different for boys. I mean, parents of young men like Naval Academy, military, yay, yay. Parents of young women aren't necessarily that way. They don't necessarily want their daughter to go in the military to be,
Right.
and to me that was the harder sell. So I would often sit down with the three of them, say a mother and a father and a daughter, and the daughter wants to come and the parents are like, yeah, I don't know if this is the right place for her. She's being also recruited by so and so and so and so. And there were many times when other women's sports, now, mind you, at that time in the late 80s, I was the only female grad assistant coach for women's sports. And
Hmm.
so I was often asked to speak to a lot of different recruits. If Karen Boyle had a cross country recruit that she felt it would benefit her to meet a grad, here's what your daughter could be like, or it's she's actually normal,
Hmm.
uh, not some crazy deranged military person. And so I did a lot of work for other women's sports as well, which I didn't mind doing.
Hmm.
But our recruiting budget also was very small, so that you have to keep that in mind. So if I couldn't drive to see a recruit play, we didn't have money for me to fly anywhere, uh, except one time. So we had a really, really hot recruit in Indiana, and this is the recruiting story I'm going to tell you, and it doesn't have a good ending. Um, just fair warning up front. But it still is
Right,
very.
right.
Then I have a better story after that. But it illustrates. So in the late 80s, our main recruiter, if you will, was the movie Top Gun.
Hmm.
So I had a very good basketball player in Indiana who had seen Top Gun, which I find this out later. I did not know this up front, who was very interested in the Naval Academy. And I'm like, wow, she's sounds like a really good player. And so Coach Smalley got the funds for me to fly out there to watch a game, talk to her and her parents and her coach, and et cetera, et cetera. So big deal, right? Get on a plane, go see a recruit. And so spent time in their living room, talked to them. She was all gung ho. Finally got the parents on board. Well, turns out, and then she came in I Day. And after the first, you see them for intramurals like 3 or 4 days later after they come in. And she was a hot mess.
Mm.
Um, Apparently, as I come to find out, she thought it was going to be like Top Gun.
Oh, geez.
And and even though I had said things to her like, plebe year is tough, blah, blah, et cetera, I don't think she was really listening.
Hmm.
And so end result was, and she ended up in a company that was not good for her.
Right.
And you will not find her anywhere on any roster because that fall I had to go to the Bethesda Hospital psychiatric ward. She had a complete
Oh, goodness.
breakdown, and they processed her out. And that was a real lesson learned for all of us, right? To really pay attention to the signs that I must have missed. I didn't know, I didn't realize, I guess, and I was young. I mean, in my 20s, and but anyway, so the other funny recruiting story is we would often get in VHS tapes, kids that wanted to come. Well, I got a tape in from the state of Iowa. And guess what? In Iowa, until 1993, they were still playing half-court 3-on-3 basketball.
Right. I remember
Till
that.
93.
Jeez.
And I had a recruiting tape of a girl that was playing this half-court 3-on-3 game. It was the most fascinating thing I had ever seen. Really, it was, because I'd heard about it, but I'd never seen it. And these 3-on-3 games, these half-court 3-on-3 games were intense. I mean, it was serious basketball. They're just playing 2 half-court mini 3-on-3 games. And so anyway, that was that girl didn't end up coming, but I must have watched that tape like 50 times because I was so fascinated by it.
Wow. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So the last thing I want to mention, and it's just more or less to kind of give me your overall global view, because again, I mean, you've been there as a player, you've been there as a coach, and you've been connected to the program even beyond your coaching days. So quite literally, you've basically seen an entire generation of players kind of move through the program. And I recognize that the program has had its ups and downs and so forth, but just looking at where it was when you arrived in Annapolis compared to now with Coach Taylor, I'm wondering, just knowing how connected you've been to it, if you could just kind of give me your thoughts on, how does it make you feel to be able to know that, okay, yeah, we've had our little roller coaster rides here and there, but now we've got a good coach in place. We've seen like we've got a good, process for selecting players that are good fits, not only for the team, but for the Navy or the Marine Corps. Talk to me a little bit about that, knowing how well connected you are to the program.
Well, I got to say, Carl, I feel very blessed to have known we're talking 40 plus years, right? Since I came in 80. So, and I think back and I go, geez, we didn't have a 3-point shot. And we've talked about that. Well, guess what? The size of the ball hadn't changed back then either. We were still playing with the men's ball, and we had no shot clock. I mean, those are 3 pretty big things that have changed mechanically about the game over the years. And then, of course, the number of women has increased at the Naval Academy tremendously over the years. And the quality of coaching has most definitely improved over the years. So to me, it makes my heart feel good to see where it is now, right? We have come so far. It really is. I enjoy reading about the team. Everything, like from the stuff, like they have a nutrition bar now. And when you think about the pregame meals they fed us, I mean, they sat a slab of prime rib and green beans in front of us 4 hours before a game. And we're like, what? You want us to eat this? It's just, just the things that have improved over the years, just like with anything, in the last 4 years. But I've seen, I've seen, and the best part for me is seeing all the players over the years. So I have seen Becky Dallin. I've seen Courtney Davidson. I've played with Colleen Cassidy. So there's certain classes that are near and dear to my heart. The class of 83 is near and dear to my heart because they were 4 seniors when I was a junior. And they pretty much adopted me. They took me in. I was by myself, and then when I was a senior, it was the class of 87, the 3 plebes that came in that year. So like the girls from 83, like Nancy Chavetta and Yolanda Williams, and like they're still my really good friends today. And 87, the 3 plebes, Margie Trott, who's probably one of the most talented point guards to ever play for Navy, because I've seen them all play, for the past 40 years. Margie Trott and Shelley Larilla, and she had a daughter who became a brigade commander. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And Mary Miles McElroy, she became the first Black female Division I athletic director.
Mary Miles was in my company.
Well, there you go.
I remember that she was a plebe in my company. That's an awesome, and I did not know that. That's an awesome story.
Yeah. So, and cool. She and I still text frequently. She lives in North Carolina where I live now. So, and she's still, scoring me tickets to like the ACC championship game, because that's the arena that she works in now. So, so I'm good friends with the 87 girls, and I tried to mentor them when I was a senior. And then my favorite recruiting class was class of 94, and there were some great kids there: Kim Cowling, Yolanda Ray. I've talked about Jen Ogilvy and Tara Caroselli and Erin Nichols and Jen. I'm in touch with those girls all the time. When we had you were probably there at our 35th reunion. Well, 94 was having their 25th reunion. And I spent a good deal of time with those girls, just hanging out, telling stories from the old days. What a great group of kids, lifelong
Right.
friends you make at those. And that was my favorite recruiting class for sure. 94 was.
Yeah. It's funny because I knew this was going to be a fun conversation because I'm thinking, wow, I practically have a historian on the Navy women's basketball program right in front of me. So I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity to find out what it was like for sure.
Oh my gosh. And the thing I'm the most, will tell you this, the thing I'm the most sad about is that there does not exist any film, or much that, so if you never saw Colleen Cassidy play, you cannot have an appreciation for how good she was. And you go back and look at the record books. I think she's still she still leads in average points per game, easily, far and away over Courtney. And if she doesn't get her number retired, I mean, I thought she'd be the first one up for that. But I think it's because nothing exists. If you didn't actually see her play, you have no idea. And that's the shame about the early years. You know what I mean? So some of that gets lost.
Right,
if you weren't there, then it gets lost and nobody knows. And Coach Smalley's gone and Tom Bates is gone. And, a lot of the old crew that was around and watched her play, they're just not there to tell her story. So that's the only real sad thing about me about the early years. But
yeah, I understand that 100%. Okay, we're going to step away for a quick break and then we'll return with our lightning round segment. So stay with us. Okay, we are back here at Navy Sports Central with former Navy women's basketball captain Becky Lewis. And Becky, now it's time for our lightning round segment. This is one of my favorite parts of the show. I've got about 7 or 8 questions here that I'm going to ask you. And just give the first answer that comes to mind. And if there's an answer that begs for a follow-up question, I'll make sure to get that in there. So here we go. First question. Who were the 2 teammates that you had the best chemistry with, and what did you like the most about playing with them?
Well, obviously, when I played with Colleen, because she took a lot of pressure off me, she was great to play with. But little known, Nancy Shavetta Hoffman. So she's 83. Nancy Shavetta. She was the 2 guard, the shooting guard. Her senior year, she was. Oh, and by the way, she's married to Phil Hoffman, the longtime Navy sports photographer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She didn't even know, but he was nobody knew it. He was taking pictures of our game that first class when she was a firstie in Halsey.
How about that?
She'd end up marrying the guy like years later. But she was the Army killer. So that whatever it was that jazzed her up, man, she would not miss. We played Army. You can guarantee they were going down because she was like Machine Gun Kelly out there, mowing them down. So yeah, those teammates I really enjoyed.
All right, cool. So this next question actually kind of builds on the one we just had because you mentioned Army. But what was your best memory from any of those wins you had over Army when you were playing?
Well, here's another piece of history, Carl. That the very first sanction. So when we were plebes, women didn't play Army. There was no star games.
That's right. That's right.
So, and I think it was because I heard the rumor, could be true, might not be, but that we dragged our feet. Navy dragged their feet because Army took in more women than we did. And they felt their basketball team was better, or the other teams were better. They had more women to choose from to supplement their teams. So Navy dragged their feet for a while, for several years. And then finally, they decided to sanction the star games. And amongst us women, we were like, oh, we want to be the first team to win a star. And so because of the nature of the season, women's volleyball got the first shot.
Oh, okay.
But they didn't win. So this first star was still up for grabs when we went up to West Point, and we were not expected to win. Army had a great team. They had a 6'2" girl. I think her name was Pam Pearson. That was just lights out. And they were playing at home, and it was a doubleheader, and it was in an arena that we were not used to playing in. I mean, the noise was deafening, as you can imagine, right? So it was a doubleheader. We were the warm up for the men's game, and I think even Coach Smalley, like everybody was kind of like, "Yeah, we're probably not supposed to win this game. We're not supposed to win this game," and we ended up winning. It was like 79-73, and it was unbelievable. The feeling was unbelievable. The place was going crazy. The few mids that had made the trip up. And it set the stage for the men to play next. And like I said, Nancy Shavetta lit the place on fire. But we all just were, and Army was fighting just as hard as we were. And we'd never been a part of an Army-Navy game. And what a way to end the season. I mean, I think it's a shame in a way that in the Patriot League, you have to play Army twice a year, at least, at a minimum. You may even play them three times.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. But when we played them, it was once a year. You had that one shot at Army. It was at the end. It was always the last scheduled game of your season, and it was all in. And to me, that's missing a little bit with the Patriot League.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is a shame. But it is what it is. And so, yeah. And then, of course, my junior year, we came back to Navy to play the first home game, star game. And we just dominated. We had 4 starting seniors. I was the starting junior. And I don't think we ever relinquished the lead. We just, I can remember at the end of the game, like just standing at half court. Well, probably Nancy was shooting a free throw going, just soaking it in, because it was a nice feeling. The game wasn't on the line. We already had it won.
Right.
And just soaking in the atmosphere. It was just tremendous. And, even more people were cheering for us at home, of course.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
So that was great.
Okay. Favorite sports movie?
Oh, Hoosiers, hands down.
All right.
Gotta be.
Yeah. That's definitely a classic. As far as I've watched so many sports movies, I almost have to group them by sport. But I would say that the one I really like too, besides Hoosiers, and I would probably, because of this historical significance behind it, I would probably have to give it the edge, would be Glory Road. That was the story about the 1966 Texas Western team that knocked off Kentucky. And it was significant because the Miners coach, Don Haskins, started 5 black players for the first time. But those two, Hoosiers and Glory Road, were 2 definitely classic basketball movies for sure. Okay, let's see. We've already talked about recruiting stories, but I want to hear one that has a happy ending. So if you have one where you're able to snag a recruit that was going to go to West Point or something, that'd be even better. But say one that has a happy ending.
Well, I guess I would say from the class of '94, both Kim Cowling, who hailed from Dundalk, and she was, she was a kid that wanted to lift herself out of her situation and work hard. And she didn't have a great start. And it was her aunt and uncle that came with her. She didn't have parents that came with her on the recruiting trip. And she had to go to NAPS and, because academics were not strong. And the same thing with Yolanda Ray. So both of those 94 girls she came from South Carolina, and again, not a strong academic background, but wanted to make something of herself, had that drive. And I was so thrilled that we were able to offer them the opportunity to do that. NAPS is a wonderful place. And then when they got to the Naval Academy itself, they were better prepared and they worked hard, both of them. I love them both. And I can't tell you, when you want a happy ending, that both of them, very successful in life. The fact that they were able to go to the Naval Academy, certainly, and they don't get me wrong. We had our struggles. I mean, I was personally there for swimming and for things like that were a challenge to a young black girl coming from the inner city of Baltimore that never saw a pool before. You know what I mean? So
right.
I just felt a special connection to them as part of my girls of '94, and just a great ending, and all credit to them. They did the work. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Just like to provide the opportunity, but they did the work.
For sure. Okay. What is one change you would make to either the men's or the women's game that you think would make it even more fun to watch? Or even maybe on a similar note, which rule do you think is the most pain in the neck that you'd rather get rid of? So any answer will do. You can answer either one of those 2 questions.
Well, I wouldn't mind if they eliminated some of the timeouts.
Right.
I think coaches overcoach. So I think you need to let the players play. Very similar. I learned a lot from watching a lot of soccer because my husband's a soccer player, but all their coaching is done in practice. Right. And then they let the players play for the most part. And I would love to see coaches just let their players play. They are so involved in every little thing that goes on the court, screaming and jumping up and that, I would love to, call. I think they have too many timeouts, and maybe it's just me because I'm old school, but I didn't like when the women's game went to quarters from halves. I liked 2 20-minute halves. I don't know why they did that.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure. It's sometimes they say, it's kind of interesting that they break it up this way, but on the other hand, I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm not really sure understand what the difference is. I was happy when they finally, and this was probably about 6 years ago, when they finally dropped the men's shot clock to even up with the women's, right? Because the women had a shorter shot clock up until just 6 or 7 years ago. So, yeah, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, because men was like 45 seconds.
Yeah,
and ours was 30.
That's ridiculous.
It was too much time. Too much time.
Exactly.
Look, Carl, you and I are running guns. Let's just admit it.
That's right. All right. Favorite all-time women's basketball player?
So this is an interesting question because I'm going to go with the player that influenced me the most as a young high schooler. So in the 1970s, the late 1970s, my dad got Sports Illustrated magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And I would normally read it from cover to cover. I loved all sports.
Mm-hmm.
And on the cover one time, and I don't even know what issue it was a woman's basketball player. And I don't know if it was the first time a woman had been on the cover as a basketball player, but it was the Blaze. And her name was Carol Blazejowski from Montclair State. And I don't know if you're familiar with her.
But I got to tell you, that name doesn't ring a bell. And I'm kind of a junkie when it comes to basketball.
Well, check out the Blaze, because when I started reading about her, she scored, like Colleen and Courtney scored like 1,800 points in college. And that's a lot. Mm-hmm. She had over 3,000 points in college.
Oh, my goodness.
3,000 points. She was like a 3-time All-American in the late 70s. Not only did she lead her team in scoring, she led it in rebounds and steals. And she was a self-proclaimed, and I remember reading the article, she was a self-proclaimed gym rat. Mm-hmm. And she said, no one's going to work harder than me. While you're sleeping, I'm working in the gym. And so in high school, I have friends that will tell you these crazy stories. I would get up before school and I would run 5 miles in the cold in Pennsylvania, dribbling a ball. And because she made me want to work harder, outwork the next person. You know what I mean? And it was very inspirational to me, and I never forgot it. And I never got to see her play in person, but it was just the myth of the Blaze. And so I would say she was very influential on me on how hard I worked and drove myself to be a better player. And then in person, I have to say I really enjoyed watching Carol Lawson play. I was a bit of a Pat Summitt fan, so I'd watch Tennessee when I could. Occasionally it was on TV. But Carol Lawson was from Springfield, Virginia. And I worked with a guy then. I was obviously in the Navy in my first tour of duty. And he was from Springfield, Virginia. He would drive I was stationed in Suitland, Maryland at the time. Hot spot that is. And he would try. And he said, you're not going to believe it. Pat Summitt was in our gym watching this girl named Carol Lawson play. And I'm like, what? And then I wrote her name down. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to keep an eye. He goes, it's unbelievable. Everybody in the stands was watching Pat Summitt and not watching the game because she actually was there, And so then, of course, she ended up going to Tennessee. And then, of course, I watched her play some, and I was like, because she had a very high basketball IQ. She was a very smart player, and she was a guard. So I really enjoyed watching her play. I admit that I don't watch the WNBA much. Just, squeezing that in with kids and work and all that, it fell down to the bottom of the list, and I just never really tuned into it that much.
Yeah, I tend to track it. I don't watch a ton of games. I'll track it during the playoffs, and if it's looks like the finals are getting down to the nitty gritty, I'll go ahead and tune it in. But I usually always track and see because, one of my favorites to watch when she was playing was Maya Moore, both when she played at UConn and also when she was in the WNBA. She's just somebody who, when I saw some of the moves she made on the court, I was like going, wow, that's okay. I know that these women players are athletic, but she is athletic.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And,
really
and don't get me wrong, my favorite thing to watch is college women's basketball. I mean, I just, the amount and the parity and how good the players have got is just amazing. And I really enjoy women's college basketball for sure.
Right. Okay. Funniest or / weirdest thing you ever saw in a game that you played in, and you can track this all the way back to high school, any level you want, and just to kind of see what comes up. I've seen some pretty strange things at the youth level, but anyway.
Well, I don't know that a lot of funny things happened when I played at Navy. Coach Smalley probably wouldn't have allowed that to happen. He was very old school. And I can remember a player coming in and wearing wristbands one day.
Uh-huh.
Well, that was not allowed. You were not going to be, I couldn't dribble behind my back or through my legs. That was too flashy for
Oh my
coach.
goodness.
Oh yeah. A very old school. And, at the time I was a little resentful of it, but in retrospect, I mean, he was a great coach. He's a great man. And I have nothing but good things to say about him. But at the time I was a punky 18, 19-year-old that wanted to dribble between my legs and go behind my back. And I wanted to fast break, and he would constantly hold me back. If you ever see the interview that Tom Bates did on me when I was a senior, it's funny to read. So Coach Smalley alludes to the fact that, you're going to have to sit on the bench if you're going to keep running down the court like that. So not slowing down and running the offense, but I would have to say the oddest thing, and it has carried through. There's something that's impacted me to this day. Was in high school. We just had a coach. We didn't have an assistant coach. And we were playing a game. It was a championship game, just in the league. It wasn't states or anything. And the other team, Sun Valley, had a big bruising girl. And she had set a pick at half court. And we were pressing them. So I'm flying down the court with this guard who's dribbling. She steps out and with an elbow clocks me in the head. Boom, I'm out. Knocks me out. So I'm laying in the court. I come to, and here's my coach. And he's not really that concerned about how I am, but he's really pissed that the referee didn't call a foul. So he helps me off the court into the locker room, where there's no doctor. He's saying, my mother has to come, are you okay? And they're rushing him back onto the court. And he had a tendency to get a little irate, and he got too mad, and he got 2 technicals in a row, and they threw him out of the game. Well, the game's not over yet. Well, who's going to coach the team?
Coach.
We have no coach. So it just so happened that in the stands was my old history teacher. His name was John Sinelli. He was watching the game, and from the stands, John Sinelli, and he stood up and goes, I'll coach the team. He comes down out of the stands, finishes the game, and then never leaves. He now has anointed himself as our assistant coach, and that was like my sophomore, junior year. And then he was our coach, and he stayed coaching the girls' team from then on out. And to this day, he's like 82 years old, and we still talk once a week or so.
Is that right?
And it formed a connection, yeah. And it's a really cool thing. But people were in the stands were like, "What are we going to do now? Who's going to coach the team?" I'll coach the team. And comes down out of the stands, and then that's it. Then he was with us from then on out. So that's an interesting.
That's hilarious.
Story. Yeah,
that's pretty good.
Worked out well.
All right, that sounds good. Well, listen, Becky, that's going to bring this conversation to a close. I really want to thank you for taking the time and meeting with us today. It's been a great catching up with you, from a classmate perspective, but also kind of getting a really nice download on, basically the history of Navy women's basketball, but both as a coach and as a player from your perspective. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Carl. It's been a fun conversation. I have really enjoyed it. We'll have to talk more later.
For sure. All right. You take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.
All right. That was Navy women's basketball standout Becky Lewis giving us some great insight on both this year's team and the history of the program. So again, Becky, thanks so much for that. I tell you what, we're just about finished here. So let's go ahead and press on with our question of the day. Remember in our last podcast, we discussed the 2 biggest wins in the men's basketball program to date. You'll recall that I broke down Navy's win over second-seeded and ninth-ranked Syracuse in the second round of the 1986 NCAA basketball tournament, as well as the Mids' win over number 25-ranked Virginia in their first game of the season this year. During the discussion, I mentioned that David Robinson led the nation in block shots during the 1986 season with 207, and that was actually more than every other Division I team except for the eventual national champion Louisville Cardinals. Now, Robinson also led the nation in rebounds that year, and I gave you a few ranges to choose from to see who could come up with the right one. The first was 250 to 350 rebounds, and that received 1 vote. Next was 350 to 450 rebounds, and 6 people picked that range. And finally, we had 450 to 550 boards, and 10 of you went with that one. And that happens to be the correct one, too, by the way. Robinson finished the 1986 season with a total of 455 rebounds on his way to collecting 1,314 for his career. The Admiral ranks first all-time at Navy in total rebounds, block shots, and average points per game. And that is just a small sample of all the records he still owns. All right, so now let's get to our question of the day for this episode, and here it is. Jennifer Coleman has scored at least 20 points in 7 of Navy's 8 games so far this year, and there are 20 regular season games left for the Mids. How many more times do you think she's going to hit that number? And here are your choices. 5 to 8 times, 9 to 12, 13 to 16, and 17 to 20. I'll go ahead and post this question on our group Facebook page so you can take a look at it and give me your best guess. Okay, we're going to pick back up with our mid-watch segment in the next podcast episode. By then, I'll have a couple of athletes picked out that we'll be tracking for the winter sports season. Before we go, though, I do have one piece of breaking news that just came out of Annapolis, and this happened after Becky and I recorded our conversation. We just learned that Colby Green has decided to leave the Navy women's basketball program. No other details were provided other than it was a mutual decision between her and Coach Taylor. Bill Wagner from the Capital Gazette was the one who broke the story. So, again, no specific details, but obviously that's something we're going to be looking at pretty closely. For the Mids to lose their second leading scorer as well as one of their top defenders is a huge blow, but it's also an opportunity for other players to step up and fill that gap. I guess we'll just see how the rest of the season goes. That's going to do it for this edition of Navy Sports Central. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, if you like what you've heard, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and remember to spread the word to all the other Navy fans out there. Once again, I'd like to thank my guest Becky Lewis for joining us on this episode and sharing her perspective on the Navy women's basketball program, both as a player and a coach. We have been getting a great response to our question of the day, so if you want to jump in on that, just go to the Navy Sports Nation group Facebook page, and I'll go ahead and pin it to the top so you won't miss it. And just a quick reminder, the views expressed on Navy Sports Central are my own and do not reflect those of the U.S. Naval Academy or Navy Athletics. By the way, the music used in Navy Sports Central comes to you courtesy of Audio Jungle. This is a great site for purchasing the rights to use music from thousands of artists around the world, and those we feature in the podcast will be credited in our show notes. Talk to you soon, everybody. Until next time, this is Carl Darden. Go Navy, beat Army.